This is Elliot Fineman, CEO of National Gun Victims Action Council, welcoming you to this edition of our biweekly radio show, It's the Guns, Stupid. The name is particularly and specifically chosen because that's what it is. It's the guns. It's the guns that are the cause of the gun violence, of course, accompanied with all of the insane gun laws we have, and that's our mission, to get those changed from insane to sane. We don't pull any punches here. We speak the truth. We are not afraid of saying things as they are. We skip the platitudes and niceties, and we get right to the issues. Speaking of issues, I'd like to say hello to Martha Rosenberg, our senior editor. And in our first segment, as many of you viewers know who watch the show regularly, we talk about this week's news. Martha, good morning.
Yeah, hi there. Good morning, Elliot.
How's it going?
Well, I'm very happy to be with you, and we have some interesting news to talk about from this week. Here in Chicago, the gun laws are very much in the news.
Well, speaking of Chicago, why don't we start right from there? There was this horrific story of the 14-year-old girl who was murdered, but it turned out that she was killed by a 14-year-old girl, murdered with a gun. I know you've been following the story, and why don't you kind of clue our viewers in as to the controversy about this?
Well, sure. We're all talking about this shooting this week for several reasons. One is because the uncle of this 14-year-old girl who allegedly killed her friend provided her the gun. He is the alleged uncle is a wheelchair user because he himself was a victim of a gun shot incident. So you'd think he would be maybe more aware of violence. But anyway, it was enabled by her family. It was announced on Facebook. There were a lot of really gruesome aspects to this in which the community enabled it. But from our perspective, it is, again, a very clear case of gun laws. And specifically, the Sun-Times has reported that this gun, and the police chief McCarthy, that this gun was transferred from a legal owner to a criminal, and because in Illinois transfers of guns where money doesn't change hands are not logged, and so it's a direct example of a loophole in Illinois law.
Well, the other horrifying aspect of this is that it was a clear example of how guns cause homicides. As the commissioner said, Police Commissioner McCarthy observed, had there not been a gun involved, this was a fight over a boy, I understand. Had there not been a gun involved, this might have been a fist fight, between the two girls. But because there was a gun, a death occurred. A murder, a 14-year-old girl is going to be charged with murder, I think, as an adult. But she'll go to jail for life. A family's devastated because their 14-year-old girl is now dead. And why? Why?
Well,
because of guns.
A clear example of what we call this radio show, which is it is the gun stupid. Kids have fought since time began, and we got bloody noses, and it's only when you introduce a gun into the event that it becomes terminal, and there's no going back. Well,
it's a tragedy. It shows, again, one of the laws I would like to see passed as a sane law is that when an adult's gun is obtained by a child and used for something like this, that the adult is charged as an accomplice to murder. That to me would go a long way in keeping the guns away from the kids who do really bad things with them. But certainly there's so many cases of where a parent's gun or an uncle's gun or, a family member's gun is either taken or given, and they should be accomplices to whatever happens with that gun. Makes
Well,
sense to
you're
me.
you're absolutely right, and I don't know if our listeners and viewers remember the Red Lake Indian Reservation shootings, but that was also an instance where he had taken the weapons from his uncle. So it's very much a factor in some of these shootings, and if adults were held responsible, it would make a big difference.
A huge difference. Remember also a year ago this shooting in Chadron, Ohio, where the kid took the uncle's gun and just went to school one morning and killed 3 kids, wounded a few others. If the uncle had been an accomplice, I assure you that gun would not have been taken by the kid. Of course, smart triggers would help too, right? If we had smart triggers, the kid could take the gun but not be able to shoot it. So there are all kinds of things we can do, but when people say it's the kids, it's the poverty, it's the this, it's the that, no, it's the gun, stupid. That's what it is. That's what it is.
You're right. You're absolutely right, and it's also the gun lack of gun laws, and the gun lobby and especially NRA pretends that these things just happen like a hurricane or something. And in point of fact, they don't happen. The same countries that have violent video games and gangs that hate each other, they don't happen. It is the guns.
Good point. Good point. Well, there were 2 other news items that we talked about during the week. One was the insanity, I don't have any other words for it, of the law passed in Georgia that essentially it's the most extreme gun bill in the country, and it essentially allows guns to be carried anywhere by virtually anyone. And anywhere means if I go to the Atlanta airport, because I'm flying to, someplace that requires me to go through Atlanta, or I'm going to Atlanta, people will be walking around with guns. This is insanity taken to the nth level, and when you see there's a picture in the article of the typical, fat-bellied white guys smiling, and signing this bill as though this is the one of the great accomplishments of civilization. It's absolute madness. It's absolute madness. What are your thoughts about this, Martha?
Well, you're absolutely right, Elliot, that many are just baffled about this, which is the most extreme gun law ever passed, especially because it follows the Sandy Hook events. Governor Nathan Deal is trying to look tough for his upcoming reelection, and I found this very ironic. He is going to be opposed by a grandson of former President Jimmy Carter, who also supported the law. So it's sort of like the Georgia politicians evidently think this is how they get elected, that they make the guns their main platform. They're now allowed in schools, bars, churches, as you said, parts of airports, and some government buildings. And I think it's very ironic that the same week that, let's say the same month this was passed, we saw a workplace shooting in Georgia at a Federal Express facility, not related to the law yet, but just showing what happens when people get angry and they're armed.
Well, the thing that we're considering as people familiar with our organization and National Gun Victims Action Council will know, our approach is not to ask the legislators to do the right thing, because we're pretty convinced that legislators such as the ones in Georgia not only will not do the right thing, they'll go out of their way to do the wrong thing. So our approach is we're done asking. We're going to tell them what to do and then compel them. And we are discussing whether it's time to call a boycott for the state of Georgia. That would include, for example, not drinking Pepsi, which is headquartered there. It would include not going to Georgia for tourism reasons. We're in discussions about that, and we're really pretty much leaning towards calling for that as a response to this. It's the only thing really that can get through. Reason's not going to get through. Any amount of violence will be blamed on the perpetrators. The whole thing is, not the guns. So this thing in Georgia, the terrifying thing to me about it, Martha, is that if our side does not do all the things we're doing, which is to try to influence the legislators, and there's many groups that are doing that and doing it effectively and working on it full time. But if we don't add our economic lever, this kind of law is going to be passed in state after state. This is what the NRA's dream is, that everybody carry a gun at all times in all places. And of course, it's just a marketing technique. It's a way of maximizing sales. But if citizens are unaware or think this doesn't affect them, or indifferent or lazy or whatever it is, they'll only have themselves to blame when they're living in a society or in neighborhoods where everybody's carrying guns every place they go. And we can stop this. We have 100 million people who want sane gun laws. If we mass our buying power, we'll force sane gun laws as quickly as possible within a year or two. So if you want to be part of making a change and you really can't stand what's going on, come to our website, www.gunvictimsaction.org, and sign our Tell and Compel pledge. It's right on the first page. Just come there, again, www.gunvictimsaction.org, and sign the Tell and Compel pledge, and let's mass our buying power and make things happen. Martha, there was one other article. I know we can go on about this news, for ages. We just had a couple of minutes left, but once again, the Republicans at the federal level have blocked funding for the Center for Disease Control to do research on gun violence as a public health issue. And it's to answer the question, is it or isn't it? And they keep defeating the research, so we can't have the facts. It's just like the tobacco industry hid the facts. This is an outrage beyond anything, and we've got to get that changed as well. What are your quick thoughts about that, Martha?
Well, sure, Elliot. Again, this does relate to Georgia because it's Representative Jack Kingston, who's a Republican from Georgia, who is on the Appropriations Subcommittee, who has killed funding for CDC to not just to look at the effect of gun violence, but also prevent it, to examine how we can prevent it. And he is quoted as literally saying, and this is a quote, "The president's request to fund propaganda for his gun-grabbing initiatives through the CDC will not be included in the appropriations bill." And that's a quote from a elected lawmaker. So this is what we're dealing with. The Centers for Disease Control who would look at the national toll of gun, especially with children, the toll of gun violence in the homes and in cities, and they're very, he's hostile to it. They say that he used to be more sympathetic to the idea of funding some research, but he's now up for re-election, and so he's running on this gun-grabbing platform.
Well, we have just got to bake the cost of supporting laws like this or stopping research like this so costly in terms of punishing the state that the lawmakers from. There's no point in trying to punish them. because they're so afraid and they're bought off by the NRA most of the time. But if we go after their state, maybe they'll have a different thought about it. Martha, we're going to have to call an end to our news section today. Thanks so much for stopping by and chatting with me. And let's just keep our eyes on out for what's going on so that we can talk about them on our next show.
Okay. Thank you, Elliot. Good to talk to you as always. Bye now.
Bye.
There are many sounds in your day-to-day life. There are sounds that wake you up. Sounds that make you smile. Sounds that energize you. And sounds that help you relax. But there are some sounds that can alert you to danger and can help save lives. Wireless emergency alerts, now on many mobile devices, use a unique sound and vibration to bring you information about severe weather events, Amber Alerts, or other emergencies in your area. With critical information from local sources you know and trust, you can be in the know, wherever you are. For more information, visit ready.gov/alerts. Brought to you by FEMA and the Ad Council.
Packers,
Vikings,
Red State,
Blue State.
We come from different places.
Uptown,
Downtown.
We come to different conclusions.
half empty,
Half full.
But no matter how different we are, we're all connected, and we can all make a difference. That's why United Way brings people, expertise, and resources together to improve the education, income, and health of our communities, the building blocks for a better life. When we live united, our efforts, magnified by others, add up to real change. Children succeed in school, families gain financial stability, the health of our neighbors improves, and suddenly, so do our communities. But real change won't happen without you.
Live united.
So let's look beyond our differences.
Live united.
One by one, let's make a difference. Let's reach out a hand to one and influence the condition of all.
Live united.
Give, advocate, volunteer. Live United. Sign up today at liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
Hi, this is Elliot Fineman again, CEO of National Gun Victims Action Council, and you're listening to It's the Guns, Stupid. I'm so pleased to have our next guest on, Mr. Mark Carlin. Mark, I've been an admirer of yours for years. You've been fighting the fight for sane gun laws for a long, long time, and I know you were one of the first founders or presidents of the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence. You, for quite some time, wrote one of my favorite blogs, The Gun Guys, which had fabulous research and fabulous positioning and fabulous writing, intelligent, incisive, right-on stuff. And now you write, you're an editor, I guess, of BuzzFlash, which is one of the leading progressive blogs, and it appears on or is part of Truth Out. Mark, welcome to our show. How you doing?
Thank you, Elliot, and I'm an admirer of your work, and it's great to talk with you.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to talk with you. Mark, I'd like to ask you what drew you into the gun issue. What was the catalyst that propelled you to essentially devote 20 years or so or more to this issue?
Actually, there was a very specific incident, if you want to talk about the catalyst, because I began as a staff member at the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence. And I was living in Rogers Park, an area of Chicago near the lake at the time, and a deputy superintendent of the Chicago police had been shot and killed. He was in a restaurant with his wife, I believe, and another couple. And as a police officer, he was, although he was off duty, he was armed, and they were waiting to be seated, and a man came up and started to harass the women. And he asked the man, to desist, and the man came back, and so he, took him to the side and, told him that he'd arrest him if he continued, or have him arrested. And the man, hurried out of the restaurant. The deputy superintendent, Reardon was his name, went back to his wife and the other couple. And the man came back and with a gun and shot Reardon, I believe, in the head and killed him. I was jogging one afternoon, and the funeral procession, if anyone's ever seen a funeral procession for a police officer who's been down, usually has a police car representative from the community surrounding wherever the officer was shot. So you had these police cars from, maybe 100 towns and cities in the Chicago suburbs and even from Indiana. And I started to think, I was jogging, and I started to think about the incident. It was going to a cemetery that is just between Evanston and Chicago. And I thought, well, here was a guy who was armed, a police officer, professionally trained. And yet, when he was shot, it didn't matter that he had a handgun or he was professionally trained. We're all vulnerable if everyone has access to a handgun. So that was the specific catalyst. I think the issue had been brewing in my head for a while, but that brought home to me and illustrated to me just how the escalation in terms of handgun presence in the United States was leading to situations where you simply can't invoke this mythical concept that being armed is going to protect you, because here was a deputy superintendent of police and he was dead.
Well, you bring up one of our major points, and we talk about this endlessly, and I think we're one of the few groups working for sane gun laws that never allows this to pass, and that's the notion that carrying a gun in public provides self-defense. It absolutely does not. The element of surprise, which is what you're talking about here, the murderer went out and got the gun and surprised the police officer. The element of surprise always defeats the gun carrier. And if it didn't, as you point out in this specific incident, if carrying a gun provided safety, no police officers would ever get killed, but they do. And carrying their gun does not make the difference. The difference is whoever surprises who is going to be the person that, triumphs, if you will, to use such a terrible word, but who's successful, at that moment. And one of the things we're doing, well, let me step back for a second. Virtually every insane gun law that we have rests on this statement that I'm going to make, that law-abiding citizens have a right to carry guns for self-defense. I'm sure you've heard that a few times in your career, Mark.
Yes, I have. I think if you look back, and I was involved with the issue for some 20 years until I became a full-time journalist, and what I basically see, Elliot, in retrospect, when I look at the obstacles that have been faced by advocates of reasonable gun policies, is that advocates like us tend to talk like you just did in a rational way, in what would seem logical. And what I saw, which was that personal incident that I happened to come across a funeral cortege, and that propelled me into thinking, well, this is an issue that really we have to do something about. So we think logically about it. The other side, and if you look at Wayne LaPierre's speech at the NRA convention last week, which, I've seen his performances at least on television or on video many a time, what he talks about is emotional. It's not rational. It's not logical. He evokes a world that's like a child's nightmare. He has a long list of threats to the individuals who are assembled there at the NRA convention. And he's invokes the boogeyman. He says everything in the world is threatening you, and a lot of it is coded words that are racial or have to do with xenophobia and, fear of Mexicans or whatever. It's just fear of the world that's not the white male world. So it's not a rational emotion that is propelling the so-called gun rights movement. It's an emotional fear that has to do with a lot of the cultural divide in the United States. I don't think even these guys, on a basic level, sometimes you talk to them, they know that, carrying a gun in public isn't necessarily going to protect them. It's a psychological aid to them. They feel more comfortable about this psychologically because they feel the whole world is turning against them in the United States. We're becoming a multicultural world. Women are now much more empowered than they were in the past. And so a lot of the white males who basically make up, and they tend to be older, the NRA, feel that the gun is kind of almost a rabbit's foot for them. Unfortunately, it's a rabbit's foot that has to cause 30,000 deaths a year in the United States and many massacres, as we know. So their emotional tie to the gun has resulted in the nightmare, not their fear of the nightmare.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, Mark. I couldn't agree with you more. And that is why the essence of our strategy, the economic lever, overcomes that for one very simple reason. We have the numbers. We have the numbers, and we have them overwhelmingly. Polls continually show there are 100 million Americans that want sane gun laws. The NRA claims to have 4 million members. Polls show that 3/4 of them are okay with sane gun laws. They don't think there should be cop killer bullets. They don't think people should be walking around with semi-automatics that shoot 50 to 100 bullets a minute. They're okay with registration. But you have 1/4 or 1 million of those NRA members, probably all of them were at the convention, not all million, but a good representative proportion of them, who want no gun regulations. So here's the numbers. It's 100 million to 1 million. I know who's going to win that game. And what it does is it relieves, if we're going to use our economic buying power to force sane gun laws, not to ask for them, but to say, here's what we want. If you don't give it, there's going to be pain. And it's not personal pain. We're going to go after your state. We're going to go after companies headquartered in your state. But we're going to force you to do what we want. And that means we don't have to win. We don't have to argue with irrational people. You can never win an argument with an irrational person. And that's why when parents have kids and they're raising them, at a certain point, the parent stops arguing and just says, here's how it's going to be. So our goal is not to win arguments with the pro-gunners. Our goal is to expose the hollowness. I always say there's not a single rational argument to support any of the insane gun laws we have, not one. And I challenge people to present them to me when I talk or when I'm in a debate, etc. And I also say there's not a single rational law that would prevent us from having the gun laws we would want to have. So yes, it's all emotion on their side. And if we didn't have the numbers, we would have a trickier problem to deal with. But we have a winning hand. We have the numbers. We can have sane gun laws as soon as we collectively put our buying power together and use it. And to me, that's the exciting thing. And I think also your observation about there's this whole notion of and I think you've spoken about this in the past or written about it, about the gunners, particularly the old white men, if you will, as victims. They claim this guy Ted Bundy, the deadbeat, on the ranch, claims that he's like Rosa Parks. I mean, these people think of themselves as victims. It's astonishing.
Yeah, and in his case, I mean, there are other ancillary issues. He's actually, a welfare king. He's getting his cattle to feed free off of property that is not his. There are about 15,000 farmers who, or ranchers, I should say, who pay the Bureau of Land Management or the federal government for grazing rights. I think it's $1.25 a month a head of cattle. He's the only one that owes over $1 million and refuses to acknowledge that the land is the land of the federal government, even though that's written into the Nevada Constitution. So he's challenging the Constitution of the state of Nevada.
He's a lawbreaker.
Well, that's true, and now he's got these armed militias. If you've read, this is where the gun issue comes in, who are, since the law enforcement for the federal government and for the state and the county sheriffs have pulled back, these militias are actually controlling access to the area surrounding Clive Bundy's ranch, and they're stopping people and asking them for identification. There's really it's an armed insurrection is what it amounts to. It's amazing to me that in a case like that, if those were Arabs or those were black citizens of the United States, Fox Television and the NRA would be saying, we need to bring in where are our police and law enforcement, because these people are essentially, as Harry Reid said, acting like terrorists. And when you look at what happened there, you had these militia people who, the gun is at the core of their belief that they are independent of any sort of government control or mandate. They forced a situation where the federal government made a judgment call to pull back its law enforcement officers because the militia said they would fire upon these officers unless they let Clive Bundy keep his cattle, because the cattle were going to be seized since Bundy wouldn't pay his $1 million bill to the federal government. So you, in essence, had the U.S. government backing down from an armed threat of its own citizens. That's sedition. And I think we need to call it what it is, that this isn't an act of self-defense. That was an act of sedition.
Well, Mark, we've got to take a break, but you've hit upon a word that I've been using for some time, and I don't hear many other people use it, sedition, and I'm so glad that you have hit on that. And why don't we pick up from that after our break and continue, because this to me was an astonishing error by our government, an astonishing error. And let's visit on it in a few minutes after our break.
Great. Look forward to talking about it.
Okay.
Today might be the day I drop out of school. Today could be the last day I try. My parents alone can't stop me. My friends can't even stop me. But you might be able to. With United Way, you could tutor me, be my mentor, or volunteer to just read with me. If someone had helped me earlier, I might not be struggling. And studies prove that kids who read well by 3rd grade are more likely to graduate. There are tons of ways people like you can help kids like me stay in school. And United Way is calling for you to be one of them. Because it takes 12 years to create a graduate. It takes about the same time to create a dropout. And the difference between me becoming one or the other could be you. Make me a success, not a statistic.
Take the pledge to volunteer now at unitedway.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
Let me tell you who to blame. Blame the boy lying at your feet, his body oozing life through the hole in his stomach where the bullet tore him apart. Blame him for challenging you, for not looking away and for not backing down when you pulled out the gun. Blame your mother for bringing you into this world when she was but a kid herself and for dragging you up, not bringing you up. Blame society for not giving you hope. Blame your father for not being there, the man who looked after himself instead of looking after you. Blame the gun in your hand for making you a target, for making you more likely to be picked on. Blame the dead boy, blame your mother, blame society, blame your father, blame the gun, blame anyone but yourself for not being strong enough to put down the gun, to break the cycle.
Well, we're back. You're listening to It's the Gun Stupid. We're talking with Mark Carlin, a giant on the fight for sane gun laws. Mark has been involved in this fight in different capacities for many years, and currently as a journalist for his blog BuzzFeed, that's part of Truth Out, one of the leading voices, progressive voices in the country. Mark, we were talking about the behavior of two groups here, the people supporting the law-breaking rancher Bundy and the government's response to it. And you made the point, which I couldn't agree with more, that not only the situation here is a matter of sedition, an armed revolt like the Shays Rebellion or any one of the other historical types of rebellions against the government, and the government has a constitutional right and, in fact, obligation to put that down, to deal with it. What they chose to do was to appease irrational people who are now emboldened, as you said. They've surrounded the area and they're, forcing people to go through checkpoints. And yes, I've heard all of the, well, there would have been bloodshed, people would have been killed. And as far as I'm concerned, yes, let's call the hand. We seem to have a Ruby Ridge or a Waco every 10 or 15 years to put these people back. Instead, we now have a government that lets the hate groups call for the destruction of the government. It boggles the mind.
Cliven Bundy said that he doesn't believe in the existence of the United States government. This isn't just sedition, it's anarchy. And I think that's another term that has to be applied here. And the very philosophy of everyone being armed is sort of an armed anarchy. If we go back to the Zimmerman stand your ground case with Trayvon Martin, that's another example of how this emotional grip that the gun has on many of the pro-gun groups and the real average pro-gunners leads to a death rather than preventing a death. Now, you had a case of George Zimmerman, who we know has a history of violence, in fact, beating women, and he felt called upon to roam his area with a gun looking for anyone who was guilty of being black or, in his terms, suspicious. And then he escalated the situation. We don't know exactly what happened in those final moments, but it's very clear if he wasn't following Trayvon Martin, who actually was tragically and ironically staying with his father in the complex in which George Zimmerman lived. So Trayvon Martin was, in fact, a temporary resident of that complex. But he was just shot for being black. If you look at it, if Zimmerman hadn't been armed, carrying concealed, then this incident wouldn't have occurred. But he became, in essence, a vigilante, taking an injustice into his own hands because there was no crime that had occurred. Trayvon Martin was shot purely for being black and wearing a hoodie. Regardless of whatever those last unknown circumstances were, I mean, if Trayvon Martin was, trying to push George Zimmerman away because he had jumped out of his van and was approaching, Martin. Martin was standing his ground. He just didn't have a gun. So I wonder if they were both armed. But Trayvon Martin wasn't. All he had was a candy bar in his hand. It was the person who was armed that caused the situation and killed someone who was simply innocently walking as a U.S. citizen on a U.S. street. So we're allowing these murders, in this case. I would call it, a jury didn't call it a murder, but I think it's pretty clear it was, that Zimmerman created the situation in which Martin was killed and shot him. And that Martin was not up to any criminal activity of any sort other than, if you want to call carrying a candy bar criminal activity. But it's this emotional need on a part of someone like George Zimmerman, who's actually someone who commits violence. You were talking about the good guys before. Well, the NRA made him a hero. He was signing cards, I read, at some sort of a gun show or gun shows recently, a couple months ago. And so he's sort of a hero to the NRA, but a hero of what? Just killing a black teenager? And also, what's the double standard here on the part of the NRA? Zimmerman is a known wife beater. He beat his wife, he beat his girlfriend, and is guilty of domestic violence. So who are these heroes to the NRA? Exactly what are they holding up as the gold standard of U.S. citizenship, other than that I'm a white guy and I have a right not only to have a gun but to shoot anyone I think is suspicious. In a situation like you had here in Florida where there was no crime being committed by the person who was ultimately killed. So this is where guns have become the nightmare, tragically and ironically, that Wayne LaPierre claims is out there. What is out there is this nightmare of so many people having guns like George Zimmerman did.
Well, what is out there is, as you call them, it's fear. It's fear-driven behavior, and that always rests on, fear is the biggest motivator of all. And when you stir it up, people respond in just the worst possible ways. There's another element to this, in that these people are generally cowards. Yes. It doesn't take much of a hero to walk around with a gun and go after people and sneak up on them and claim, you were at risk. Zimmerman was told to stay away, but he went after it. He was thirsting for action, and he took a life. He's not a hero. He's a coward. He's a bully. He's all those things. Whether he beat his wife or his girlfriend is, just a comment on character. The point is that what he did was cold-blooded murder. And
I would just add, I do think the fact that he has a history of domestic violence, and particularly it's aimed at women, is a factor, because as you said earlier, the NRA is always saying that it's only the good guys who have guns that don't commit crime. It's only the bad guys, so don't keep the guns out of the hands of the good guys. But a lot of these so-called good guys actually have committed violence, in this case a woman beater. That's essentially what George Zimmerman is. And there's a very fine line between what is a good and a bad guy. I mean, George Zimmerman shot an innocent civilian teenager. Is he a good guy or bad guy now? He beat women. Is he a good guy or bad guy? He's a hero to the NRA and the gun guys, and yet he kills someone and he beats women. So what is their argument worth about the good guys should have the guns? They believe he should have a gun. And yet, by any standard of civilization, he is not a good guy.
Well, I absolutely agree. And my response when the good guy or law-abiding citizen is brought up is that I don't know what that means. Define for me what a good guy is or a law-abiding citizen, because your definition seems to say that a good guy will always, under all circumstances, do the right thing. They'll never do the wrong thing, or, a law-abiding citizen, and that's a fantasy. No such person like that exists. It's a mythical creature. What I point out, of course, it's only logic, and we know that logic doesn't go far with these people. Fortunately, we don't have to win arguments with them. But what I do point out was that every criminal was once a law-abiding citizen, or a good guy, right, whatever you want to call them. So the good guy or the law-abiding citizen is not a constant. It's somebody that can change. And the proposition that the gun people throw at us is that, well, we should bet that they're not going to change and get us in trouble. But we know they change. So therefore, because we know they change, we have to have some sane gun laws to restrain them. Listen, Mark, it is a joy talking with you. I hope you'll come back for another visit. I think we could really go after a number of topics, and I just want you to know how much I respect you and what a big fan I am of yours. So let's do this again.
Yes, and keep up. You're doing wonderful work, Elliot. Keep it up, and I would be glad to be on again. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Okay, my friend. Take care.
Take
care. Time for a break, and then as we always do, I'll come back with some closing comments in my closing monologue. So stay tuned.
On the next episode of Recipes for Disaster.
So we've got our neighbor Paul coming over tonight for a barbecue, which is why I prepared a delicious lemon rosemary steak marinade from my special collection of old family recipes. To make sure the steaks are extra, extra, extra tender, I left them marinating out on the counter overnight, just like Nana used to.
Maria may mean well, but without food safety, it never ends well. Always thaw or marinate foods in the refrigerator at 40 degrees Fahrenheit or below, or you could make your friends and family really sick. Maria's neighbor Paul didn't think twice about the steak he ate until he was presenting his company's financial forecast to the board. That's when a sudden bout of food poisoning made it explicitly clear that profits weren't the only thing on the rise. Watch Recipes for Disaster at foodsafety.gov. You'll learn the right steps as Maria does everything wrong. Brought to you by the USDA, HHS, and the Ad Council.
Okay, our next guest is Robert Farago, an old friend. Robert's been on our show before and is one of the people that one can have a very reasonable and civil discussion with, and I'm really glad to have him back. We, on our last show, talked about confiscation, and if you want to see what we talked about, just go to the our archives on our website, and you can catch the whole show there. Robert, just for those of you who may not be familiar with him, has a very interesting background. He was a journalist with NBC and some other major networks. Then went off to England for 10 years, and among other things, became a hypnotist and practiced it, and maybe still does. He returned to the States and wrote a very well-followed and successful blog called The Truth About Cars, which he, as a good entrepreneur, sold, hopefully at a decent return, Robert, and now authors a very highly followed and well-respected blog, The Truth About Guns. Robert, good to have you back with us.
Elliot, nice to be here again with you.
Okay. Well, last time I had two items on the agenda that I wanted to talk with you about. And we got to one, which was confiscation. And the other item I wanted to talk to you about was gun-free zones.
Right.
I don't know if there's anything as a burning issue that you'd like to talk about, but I would like to start off with gun-free zones. And then if there's anything, if we have time, if there's anything in particular that you would like to talk about in depth, we could try, or have you come back again. So anyway, gun-free zones. The argument...
Well, we call them target-rich environments.
Target-rich environments. The argument from the pro-gun side is that if you look around and take inventory of all of the major mass shootings that have taken place, virtually all of them have occurred in gun-free zones, and therefore they conclude that had those zones not be gun-free, had there been people with arms there, they could have deflected, defended, done something about the shooter.
I think that's a fair characterization of the position. The idea being the one that NRA Vice President Wayne LaPierre voiced after Newtown, which is the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Now, whether that's a police officer or an armed civilian is a question of debate that we can have, but generally speaking, it's true. When somebody is homicidal with a firearm, the only way you're going to stop him or her is with somebody with a firearm. It's been proven time and time again. We even have that recently.
That runs into, my first, comment about LaPierre's statement, which has now become kind of a rallying cry. I don't know what a good guy is. I really don't.
Well, a good guy is the one who's not shooting at you or other innocent life. It's
well,
who's not,
maybe that day.
Someone who's not. Someone who's operating
good guys.
Law,
good
right?
guys aren't constants. Good guys are the ones who, every criminal was once a good guy. So I'm not that confident giving quote good guys guns because I don't know who they are.
Elliot, somebody who's committing a crime with a gun is a bad guy. Somebody who's defending life with a gun is a good guy. Is that easy enough to understand?
And the guy who's committing the crime with the gun just as took place tragically at Federal Express yesterday down in Kennesaw, Georgia, where in fact there are no gun-free zones there. Everybody has to carry a gun.
No. Federal Express.
Or own one, I guess.
Elliot, whoa, stop. Federal Express is a gun-free zone. It's private property, and you can go on our website and see a picture of the gun-free zone signs that are posted there. Federal Express facility in Georgia was a gun-free zone.
Right. The property owner has the right to declare their place off limits for guns, and Federal Express does.
Which I agree with as well.
Yeah. So, but the point is that guy was a good guy till he lost it.
No,
he wasn't a good guy. That's my first issue. I don't know what a good guy is any more than
Let's deal with that. Let's deal with that issue. A good guy is somebody who does not commit a crime, either with a firearm or any other way, with an axe or with his fists or any other particular way. By thy deeds thy shall be known. Now, if you're saying to me you can't identify who's good and who's bad so that nobody should have firearms in case a good guy becomes a bad guy, that's a pretty spurious argument. If I have a firearm, I'm 54 years old, I carry it everywhere I go, and I am in no danger of becoming a bad guy. I have not shot anybody, I have not threatened anybody, and I have no desire to. I simply use my firearm for self-defense. Now, you say that there's a potential for me to become a bad guy. There's a potential for anyone to become a bad guy. But the important thing is that if a bad person shows up, then the good people can stop him or her before they kill, or at least limiting the amount of people they kill. This is common sense, Elliot. I cannot understand your argument against armed self-defense. If somebody had a firearm in that FedEx building when the bad guy, the guy trying to kill innocent people, had showed up, perhaps that person could have stopped him sooner.
Well, let's say 10 people had firearms when that person showed up, and all 10 people pulled out their firearms and started shooting. Do you think everybody would shoot the right person, let alone the fact that trained police miss 70% of their shots? So the good guy, for the moment, who's the good guy with the gun, is more liable to be shooting other people than the perpetrator.
All right, let me deal with that, Elliot. Okay, let me address that question. Okay,
sure.
That's a very important point. First of all, it hasn't happened. We have millions of Americans who are armed, millions of them. Show me one example where multiple people were attacked by a bad guy, pulled out their gun, and shot the wrong person. Give me one example of that happening.
Well, I'll show you one example of where the good guy, whatever that is, again, we can come back to that, did not pull out his gun for fear that they'd be shot, and that was in the Gabby Gifford shooting.
No, you're changing the subject, Elliot.
No, it's the same point. The same point. The guy didn't pull out his gun. I mean, he said that he said this in interviews. He said he thought about pulling out his gun, but he was afraid he'd be shot by other people who were carrying guns. And by the way, he was going to shoot the person who was stopping, who was incapacitating the Gabby Gifford shooter. But
Elliot,
he said, I didn't pull out my gun. I was afraid other people would start shooting at me thinking I was the bad guy. And imagine, because in Arizona, Arizona is one of those places where everyone does walk around. Many people walk around with guns. If everyone pulled out their guns to stop the, attacker, the carnage that would have resulted, from that.
When has that happened? Elliot, there are over 800,000 defensive gun uses in America per year. Over 800,000. Some estimates say 1 million. Some estimates go as low as 80,000. But let's take the low estimate. 80,000 defensive gun uses a year, and you can't give me one example of this nightmare scenario of multiple armed people pulling out their guns and shooting each other or shooting the wrong person. You can't give me one. So why should we even consider that argument? It's just completely off the charts. It's not happening.
Well, let's come back to the defensive gun uses. According to the FBI's Uniform Crime Report, which each year comes out, one of the charts they put out is the legitimate defensive gun, defensive uses of guns. The number they come up with is under 400 a year. And most of those are guns or shopkeepers that are warding off criminals. The incredible reports, hold on for a second. The reports of 80,000, 1 million, 2 million are just fictional. They're none of these result in arrests. None of these result in perpetrators being brought to justice. They're all anecdotal stories of X, Y, Z happened, and then I pulled out my gun, and life was good, and I was safe. I don't buy them.
Elliot, that's you're simply not looking at the facts. There are studies. There are multiple studies about defensive gun uses in the United States. Go to Wikipedia. Look at the sources. The data is there, from Mr. Hemingway all the way up to John Locke to other. There is plenty of data which suggests that there are tens of thousands of successful gun uses every year in America. It makes sense, Elliot. Come on, I personally report on them every day. I've got a defensive gun use post every day, 365 days a year. Sometimes we get multiple ones. Can give you loads of anecdotal incidents, hundreds of them, hundreds that we've published, of people successfully using guns to defend their life, the life of their loved ones, and property. You can't give me one example, not one, where multiple people pulled out guns and shot each other or the wrong person. You can't point to one. Elliot,
you can't point to one example where people with guns stopped a mass shooting. You can't give me one, on that side. We were just talking about the fact. I mean, give me one. Tell me one where somebody pulled out their gun that they were carrying and stopped a mass shooting. There's not a single report of that.
So wait, I've got 80,000 plus, 80 to 1.2 million is the estimate of defensive gun uses, and now you're changing the subject to a mass shooting. Why are we talking about mass shooting? Those are black swan events. I can give you an example of where somebody stopped. There's one where a church member, somebody went into a church to shoot people in the church, and one of the church members got out a gun, pointed it at the guy, and the guy ran away. There are plenty of examples of that, but I can give you there are scientific studies showing these thousands of gun uses every day. Over 1,000 defensive gun uses a day, and you're changing the subject to spree killers.
I'm not changing the subject. You came back to me saying that I couldn't give you one example of where multiple people pulled out guns and started shooting and wound up shooting each other. And I said, to the other side of it, you couldn't give me one example of where people carrying guns stopped the mass shooting, the person who came in to Federal Express yesterday, for example, and started shooting. You can't give me one where a gun was used for that. And here's Robert, just my point. Let me just tell you what my problem is.
Elliot, my problem is you're not letting me speak. Okay,
I am letting you speak. Then you ask me a question, and I'm trying to respond to it. But go on, make your point again.
Elliot, you're changing it to mass shootings because, and I can give you an example. I'm looking it up on the internet now. But you're changing to mass shootings. You're ignoring what about the person in their home where a person breaks in intent on raping, hurting, or killing them or taking their property, and they stop that attack with a firearm. Now, that happens every single day in the United States of America. And now you're talking about mass shootings because you're doing the typical
let's talk
thing
about
that
the person who breaks into the home. Okay?
Elliot, you cannot show me one example of of multiple people pulling out a firearm and shooting each other. You can't do that because it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. You're setting something up as an example of why people shouldn't be armed, and you're wrong. You're just plain flat out wrong. You're scaring people with possibilities that, A, are not going to happen, and even if it does, you're talking about people coming in to shoot people. If someone shoots someone by mistake, as the police do frequently, you're still in a situation where people have a right to defend themselves, and the net positive is there. 80 to 1.2 million people.
That's where we depart. The net positive in all of the studies that I've seen and all of the facts that I'm familiar with show that the more people walking around with guns, the more homicides, the more assaults, the more damage of gun violence. But I want to focus on the two issues here. We're talking one about a mass shooting and one about the home shooting, the individual, the one that you say happens thousands of times a day, where the person with the arm defended themselves. So let's talk about that for just a moment. Here's my take on that. If somebody breaks into your home and they have the drop on you because you were sleeping or because they came in and you didn't hear them, whatever the reason, they surprised you, you could have 500 guns there. They're not going to do you one bit of good. And I always cite the Truman Capote book In Cold Blood, where the Hendersons couldn't have been more armed and couldn't have been more the family that would wind up being murdered, couldn't have been more heavily armed, couldn't have been more skilled. They were all accomplished marksmen, and yet their guns did them no good because of the element of surprise. If you're in your home and you hear a noise on the first floor and you can sneak down with your gun and surprise them, yes, you'll defend yourself. But what I don't understand, and there's story after story of this, Robert, and this is what's so troubling, of how the intruder came in, the gun owner got the drop on them, and stopped the intrusion, and then the person, ran away. The story doesn't end with the person was held there while the police were called and, the person was arrested. It never ends that way. So I really have trouble accepting, that happens thousands of times a day. Does it happen? Of course it happens. But it doesn't happen, in my view, thousands and thousands of times a day. It also happens that people not wearing seatbelts are saved.
Elliot,
they can be pulled out of their car because they weren't wearing their seatbelt. But that's not a position for policy.
All right, Elliot, let's give me a second to respond. Now, first of all, I never said thousands and thousands. The actual figure is somewhere between 800 and 1,500 defensive gun uses per day in the United States. It's not thousands and thousands. It could be as much as 8,000. But if you haven't watched the news or used Google to find examples of people defending themselves against home invasion with firearms successfully, where the criminal who entered was either shot and killed or chased off, police reports of all this happening, this isn't made up. If you haven't seen those, then you are simply closing your eyes to them. Because all you need to do is type in home invasion gun into Google, and you will find hundreds of them. Now, let's go back, if I may have a second, to this idea of where was somebody pulling out a gun and saving someone from saving a mass shooting. I'm looking right now at a report here that says that from the Spartanburg Herald-Journal about a churchgoer near Spartanburg, Carolina, was credited with saving the lives of fellow worshipers after a man kicked in the door of the church and leveled a shotgun. The man took out his firearm and apprehended the person and chased him off and apprehended him so that there was no loss of life. Okay, there is an example of a mass shooting that was stopped by a good guy with a gun. That's one example, but there you go. There are other ones as well. If you look for them, you will find them.
Well, the example you've just cited, you said something that conflicts, or at least I don't understand. You said that he chased him off, he chased the would-be killer off, and then apprehended him. So if I chase down this story, which
Elliot,
you can send to me, I'll find that this person, the would-be killer, was arrested. That in other words, the would-be killer that was stopped by the gun carrier wound up in police custody and has been charged for attempted murder. Will I find that?
Yes, you will. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I'll be happy to look that up.
All right. So what does that tell you, Elliot? What does that tell you? That story is true. What does it tell you? You said there was no example. I've given you one. Now, what does that tell you?
What does it tell me? It tells me the same thing that a story would tell me about somebody's car. Somebody who had a car accident, and the only way they could get them out was to, of course, pull them out with the jaws of death or life. I don't know quite what they're called. And the only reason they were able to extricate them was because the person did not have a seatbelt on. So yes, you could give me examples of situations where the very act of not wearing the seatbelt was led to the right outcome, but that wouldn't be persuasive to say let's not have people wearing seatbelts. So yes, I'm sure there are some examples. I'm sure nothing's 100% one way or the other. I'm sure there are some examples, but the idea that there's 800 of these things a day, to me, is there's not 800 arrests. If there were as many as were controlled, as many as claimed, it would dwarf the number of actual, ones that take place that we really know took place, because there have been arrests and people prosecuted. So the numbers just don't add up. The numbers just don't add up. And, what does add up...
Elliot, let me talk, please, okay?
Sure.
First of all, you said there were no examples, and I've given you an example. So now you're making another excuse why this example isn't important. You said to me there was no example. Rewind the tape. There's one. I can give you others, okay? So you're being a slippery customer here. You're not dealing with the facts of the matter. You're using conjecture and non-scientific reason to try and shove this to the side. If you go to defensive gun uses in Wikipedia, there's a study by an anti-gunner called Hemingway that was done that showed that there were 80 to 100,000 defensive gun uses. 55,000 to 80,000 defensive gun uses per year. Hemingway is an anti-gunner. Okay, he's a person who doesn't want civilians to own firearms. You are simply talking from a position of illogic. You are not familiar with the facts. You're not dealing with the facts, and you are simply operating off of fear, emotion, and prejudice.
Well, tell me why the published FBI, and I'm familiar with Hemingway, he's a professor of public health up at Harvard. Tell me why the FBI's annual report, which is official, and it's an official report, only reports under 400 defensive gun uses per year, legitimate ones. Well, how could what's wrong here? What's true? I mean, that's a number we can all look at. Now, you might say their number's not right.
Are you saying the 400 defensive gun uses or 400 homicides justifiable?
No, 400 legitimate defensive gun uses of, killings, yes, of homicides, where guns were used to kill somebody who was attacking somebody.
No. It's not, those are justifiable homicides are not defensive gun uses. That's a subset of defensive gun uses. You're comparing apples to oranges, Elliot. We're talking defensive gun uses are both brandishing only, people who use guns to chase people away, people who shoot people and wound them, people who shoot and don't hit people and they still go away. It's a subset,
give me a scenario of brandishing. Tell me how that works. You're walking down the street, you see somebody with a gun, you pull your gun out, you think... I debated McDonald. I think you're familiar. You should be familiar with the McDonald case. That was the follow-up to Heller. So that what happened in Heller in D.C. now became the law in all the states, that everyone can have a gun at home for self-defense. So in the conversation with McDonald, he talked about how his neighborhood had become so dangerous over the years that you couldn't safely go out without a gun. You just couldn't go out without a gun. We went through the whole interview, and then afterwards we were chatting, and the moderator of the interview asked Mr. McDonald, had he ever pulled out his gun to defend himself? And McDonald looked at him and said, "Are you crazy?" I mean, this is a quote. "Are you crazy? I'd never pull out my gun. They'd have killed me in a minute. If I'm surrounded by gangbangers or, rough people in my neighborhood, the last thing I would do is pull out my gun. No, I've never pulled it out." So tell me a scenario where you would be on the street and you brandished your gun. Why would you brandish your gun?
All right. First of all, let's back up a second. And the word brandishing is a legal term. There's two meanings of brandishing. Brandishing is illegal in some places, which means you're using the gun to threaten people who shouldn't be threatened, who are not posing any risk to you. Let's talk about presenting the firearm, because that's what we're talking about. People take out their gun and present it and aim it or just show it to somebody who needs to have it shown to. In other words, there are legal situations where you can use your firearm as a threat against someone, and if you don't satisfy that, if you're not in imminent danger of death or grievous bodily harm, then you cannot use your gun to intimidate, threaten, or, quote, brandish people. So let's be very clear about what we're talking about. These
just to be clear, you're saying that, of course, you can't pull out your gun to intimidate somebody, but if you're in imminent danger of bodily harm, you can then pull out your gun and brandish it. So give me an example of somebody being in imminent danger of bodily harm. Is someone standing in front of you with a gun? So now you're in imminent danger of bodily harm. The last thing in the world you would do is pull out your gun. If somebody, how would you know that somebody was, that you were in imminent danger of bodily harm? The example you gave in the church certainly satisfies that. I would agree with that. But how would you know on the street?
You're a woman walking down the street. Somebody comes out with a knife to either rape or hurt you. And in that situation, you then are able to draw your firearm and make that person stand down.
And you think you'd have the time to do that? That's the kind of test I want to do. That's exactly the test I want to do. I want to see the woman with no training who happens to have a conceal and carry and is carrying the pink pistol in her purse be suddenly startled by a madman with a knife that's going to rape her, calmly open up her purse and in time get it out and be able to defend herself. I'd like to see that happen because, you know, that to me is not real.
Elliot, not only does it may be not real to you, but it happens every single day in the United States of America. People use firearms to defend their life. That happens whether you believe in it or not, Elliot, whether you think it's real or not, whether you think it's advisable or not, whether you think it's a good idea or not, it happens. And for you
I'm not convinced it happens.
For you to say that people should be disarmed so that they cannot have the possibility of defending themselves with a firearm is cruel. It's cruel and it's hateful. These are people, innocent people, going about their lives who want to have a way to protect themselves, an effective way to protect themselves from criminal predation. What would you have them do? Would you leave them defenseless against the criminal element and the psychotics? Would you do that, Elliot?
In country after country, with all the same risks and threats, nobody has anything resembling the homicide rate or the crime rate that we have. And
Elliot,
people do defend themselves. There aren't people being raped right and left in England or in Italy or in France.
Of course they are.
And they're not defending themselves with guns.
Elliot,
if let me say this, if you could, and this is why I've wanted to do this test. This is exactly why I wanted to do this test. If we can list the scenarios, and apparently you are familiar, with them because you say you know that you report them every day, 800 a day. So there must be some typical scenarios. And what I want to do is say, okay, let's test them. Let's set up the scenarios real time. Let's have the woman walk down the street and the would-be rapist jump out, with a knife, and let's see her defend herself. If you can demonstrate to me that people carrying guns really can defend themselves, I will be a supporter of that position. I just don't think it's real.
Wait, hold on. Let's back up here. First of all, would you leave that woman without a firearm? Would you have her walking down the street without a firearm?
Absolutely. I don't see that every person walking down the street is going to be raped. I would also tell her not to walk in Central Park at 4 o'clock in the morning, by herself with or without a firearm. I mean, it depends where she's walking, but yes, every woman should not be walking around carrying a firearm because more harm's going to come than good. More of those guns are going to be stolen. They're going to go off accidentally. They're going to be misused because people under stress are going to absolutely use them the wrong way. Absolutely, yes, I would have her not walking around with a gun.
Let me see if I get this straight. This woman who say she's going to work. She's living in an area where there's a high crime rate, and she's working for a living, supporting her child, or children, or family, whatever. And there are plenty of people who do that, I hope you understand. This woman is going, and she wants a firearm to defend herself. Now, you're saying that she shouldn't have one because society is better off without her having one, or she might be safer without having one. So you're going to take away her natural, human, constitutionally protected right to self-defense. You're going to take that away from her and say to her she can't have a gun to stop a rapist or a criminal from harming her. You would prefer her to be defenseless than to be able to defend herself because you believe that she has more chance of being hurt by that firearm than she does of hurting or stopping someone else hurting her.
What I believe is that she can't possibly defend herself with her gun. And because you can present that hypothetical that she can, you then argue that everyone should be walking around with guns. So,
Google
that's listen, again, Robert, I hate to do this, but the producer has just told me we've run over our time, and we've got to continue this. This is very serious, and we also have to get this test done. I know you did a test in some facility that you constructed or had constructed. I want to do it in the same facility that the police use to train their officers. And let's find out. Maybe you're right. Maybe you really are right that the woman walking around with the gun can defend herself. But my money says you're not. and let's find out. Listen, it's always a pleasure talking with you, and we will have you back again, and we'll finish up on this. You know, this is real important, and it's not something that we should dismiss or just say we've run out of time and can't talk about it again. So bear with me. I'm sorry we've run out of time, but we will do it again. Okay, take care, and look forward to next time.
I'll get you later, man.
Okay.
There are many sounds in your day-to-day life. There are sounds that wake you up. Sounds that make you smile. Sounds that energize you. And sounds that help you relax. But there are some sounds that can alert you to danger and can help save lives. Wireless emergency alerts, now on many mobile devices, use a unique sound and vibration to bring you information about severe weather events, Amber Alerts, or other emergencies in your area. With critical information from local sources you know and trust, you can be in the know, wherever you are. For more information, visit ready.gov/alerts. Brought to you by FEMA and the Ad Council.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
Well, this is Elliot Fineman welcoming you back to It's the Gun Stupid, our closing segment, where I get to talk about a couple of things that I particularly would like to talk about at this time. We've had a wonderful show. I want to thank our two guests, Mark Carlin and Robert Farago. And I did want to follow up on one thing that Mark said that I didn't have a chance to really respond to, but I think it's important for our viewers to hear this comment. Mark several times asked me if I was going to take the ability for a woman, say, walking on the street to defend herself against a rapist by being opposed to, by taking her gun away. In other words, I don't want people walking around in public with guns. I'm against conceal and carry. I'm against anyone walking around in public with a gun other than a police officer or somebody authorized, a law person. And I think one of the things that Robert Farago and all of the pro-gunners who feel that way don't get is why we feel the way we feel. And the best way I can convey that is a conversation I had with somebody after a talk I'd given who made the same point. And I said, look, are you familiar with ricin? And they said yes. And I said, good, because ricin is as deadly a powder, a material, a chemical as there is. And if you touch it, your history. I said, I would like to, I'm a law-abiding guy, and the Second Amendment does not say anything about guns or firearms. The Second Amendment just says, it talks about arms. And according to the UN definition of arms, there's about 33 types of arms, and ricin would be one of them. So my point is, under my Second Amendment right, I would like to be carrying ricin, and I feel ricin would protect myself and my family if I needed to. And how would you feel about that if I was walking around with ricin? And the person I was talking to you said, well, not too good. I mean, that's really dangerous stuff. That could kill a lot of people. And I said, you got it. That's the point. That's how we feel about guns and people walking around with them. People lose control. Accidents happen. Guns get stolen. nothing good comes from people walking around with guns, and that was my way of at least conveying why I and so many of us strongly feel that walking around the street or outside your home with a gun is completely inappropriate, dangerous, and something that's just not a society that I want to live in. They always tell me, well, then go move. And I always say, well, there's a society where there are no gun regulations and everyone can walk around with any gun they want. And in fact, the government really doesn't get in your way at all. It's a little place called Somalia. So why don't you go there? That's your heaven on earth. That normally doesn't end in agreement, but I just get tired of listening to some of the things that are thrown out by the other side. I did want to talk about the shattered heart. I don't know if you saw our press release this week. One of the things that we have not had on our side is a symbol representing what it is that gun violence does and why it is that we want sane gun laws. We've not had a symbol. I remember during the Vietnam War, people were tying yellow ribbons around their trees and around their, windows. And the idea was that they would keep these yellow ribbons tied around until the soldiers came home, till the war was over and the soldiers came home. Ribbons have become kind of the go-to symbol. They're used for their peace signs, for breast cancer, for gay and lesbian rights, and we had nothing. And I asked our Bill Glasser, our director of communications and one of our VPs of our whole effort here, to go about seeing if he could come up with a symbol that we could say is the national symbol. And Bill, who's a very creative guy, he was a producer for America's Most Wanted for 10 years and is one of the most creative people I know, spent 2 months working on this, working with artists, and finally, with a glass blower, if you can imagine, a glass blower right near the Capitol in Washington, an artist who practices it, a very accomplished artist, teaches it, came up with a shattered glass heart and a shattered heart pin, which is the symbol that we want people to hang the shattered heart, the shattered glass heart in their windows until we have sane gun laws, to wear shattered heart pins, and when people ask them what they are, to tell them what they are. We want to have a visual reminder of what gun violence it is. And I can attest to it because, as many of you know, my son was murdered sitting in a restaurant with his wife in San Diego by a paranoid schizophrenic who'd been in mental institutions twice and had legally obtained the gun that he used to murder my son. And my son was a war hero. He'd been in the most dangerous places in the world. He was a combat medic with special forces, and he lost his life sitting in a restaurant with his wife in San Diego. So my heart is shattered. I will never be the same. My heart will never be whole. There's a void that will never be filled. But shattered hearts still have to function, and they still have to have determination to go forward and do something. I've done it. All the friends I've made in Newtown, who I work very closely with, have also done it. Going forward in different ways to work on eliminating or significantly reducing gun violence, and doing it with a shattered heart that will never heal. And we give these away for free for people who come to our website and make a donation. to our Shattered Heart Fund. You can get a Shattered Heart glass object, or they're all original pieces. Nothing is machine made. These are all handmade, and display it in your window. You can, for a donation, a small donation, get a Shattered Heart pin. And we invite you to do that. It has two purposes. One is to get everyone to recognize the symbol and rally behind all the organizations that are fighting for sane gun laws. And the other is to help us fund the work that we're doing to get as many of the 100 million people to sign the Tell and Compel Pledge. In fact, while you're on our website, sign the Tell and Compel Pledge, because once we have a critical mass of people having signed that, we will get gun laws and get them, sane gun laws, and get them quickly. Using our combined buying power as a lever is precisely what's going to force the sane gun laws, along with all the work that everybody else is doing. So thanks for being here. We really appreciate all the folks who watch along. We will have another exciting show 2 weeks from now. We always have a guest from our side and a guest from the pro-gun side, so they can espouse their views. And we'll argue with them. We'll have a civil discussion. And I must say that everyone who's been on from the pro-gun side has engaged in civil discussion. They haven't agreed with me, and I haven't agreed with them on just about all the things we've talked about, but at least we can disagree in a civil way. Okay, all the best. Tune in again in 2 weeks for It's the Gun Stupid, and thanks for having been here.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.